Part of understanding art of any genre, whether it's literature or music or pictorial art, and that includes both painting and sculpture, is trying to decipher what statement the artist is making through his or her art, what exhortation or even imperative he or she is making in whatever art has been created. And this last part of this video is devoted to trying to find out what Da Vinci is trying to tell us in his painting of the Last Supper. Now, this is not the same thing as trying to find a code or a secret message in art. Frankly, I think that's a waste of time unless you're looking at a poem that is decidedly a riddle. Then you could look for a code or a secret message. Otherwise, understand that all art teaches something. The artist is a teacher, whether we like it or not. And that artist is making a statement about the human condition or about something that is important in life that we should all notice. And what I'm going to try to do now is analyze the painting in such a way as to try to decipher what Da Vinci is trying to say to us, what he's trying to tell us. The first thing that we notice when we look at the painting is that Jesus is centered both horizontally and vertically. In addition, the presentation of Christ in this painting is that of an equilateral triangle. Now, the first time that was pointed out to me, I thought, well, so what? Hundreds of paintings and sculptures during the Renaissance especially were composed to resemble an equilateral triangle. The equilateral triangle in the Renaissance was a symbol of stability. It's very difficult to tip over an equilateral triangle. Think of trying to tip over one of the pyramids. The center of gravity is so low that it's just a very difficult task, even if you have a very miniature one. So yes, Christ is composed in this way as an equilateral triangle. But notice that in contrast with most works of art, it's simply Christ that's composed as a triangle. In most works of art, the triangle is part of the entire composition of the painting, not just a small part of it. Let's look at some examples of the equilateral triangle in Renaissance art. And I want you to notice I put blue frames around many of these paintings so that we could see the entire triangle. So here we go. Let's just look at these paintings. Here's one, the Virgin and Child, and it is designed as an equilateral triangle. Another one, this is Madonna del Prato, Madonna of the Prairie. And again, this painting, the main characters in this were designed as an equilateral triangle. Another painting by Da Vinci, this is the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, who is theoretically Mary's mother. It's designed as an equilateral triangle. Here is Raphael's Madonna and Child. Again, equilateral triangle. Another one by Raphael, the Holy Family, as a triangle. Raphael, once more, Madonna del Cardellino, I think. I don't speak Italian that well, but it too is a triangle. Virgin and Child in a landscape. It's a triangle. Some things a little bit more famous by Michelangelo. Here's his Pietà. It's designed as a triangle. And not just any triangle. Keep in mind, these are all equilateral triangles. Here is Lorenzo de' Medici from the Medici Chapel. The three sculptures in this case are designed as an equilateral triangle. And before you call me out on shenanigans for this one, I want you to note that the base of the triangle extends all the way across the base of the two sculptures down here, and that the upward angles of the triangle both meet in the corner of the niche in which Lorenzo is placed, and that the two parts of the triangle at the top, the apex, is right here at the top of the four columns on either side of this niche. That is an equilateral triangle, and Michelangelo does the same thing on the exact opposite wall of the same chapel. This is Giuliano de' Medici. So, yes, Christ is portrayed in an equilateral triangle. And not only that, but he fits inside that triangle better than any other character I've seen. Usually the characters kind of give a general impression of an equilateral triangle, but there are huge gaps here or swings outside of the triangle there, whatever the case may be. But in the case of Christ here, his position within that triangle is nearly perfect. And so we need to figure out what Da Vinci is telling us. Well, the first thing I did was I tried to see where I could fit equilateral triangles elsewhere in the composition. And so I moved the same equilateral triangle around and took a picture. And placement makes no difference anywhere in the painting. It doesn't make any difference. Even if I find one angle at 60 degrees, there is no parallel 60-degree angle. And orientation doesn't seem to make any difference either. I pushed this thing all around the place and turned it and twisted it and could not find a single complete equilateral triangle. Again, I found angles, I found lines, parts of a triangle, 1/3 of the triangle, but never a complete triangle. So here's a nice close-up of Jesus in that equilateral triangle, and he fits almost perfectly. So what's Da Vinci trying to tell us with this? Keep in mind that equilateral triangle is not outlining the entire composition, but just Jesus within that composition. So what is Da Vinci trying to tell us here? You need to understand what's happening. Jesus is just about to be betrayed by one of his closest friends, one of his 12 disciples, and he knows that. And as a result of that betrayal, he's going to die the following night, and he knows that as well. This man is in turmoil emotionally. And yet, in the commotion of the room, when everybody else is going, "Is it me, Lord? Am I going to betray you? Jesus is the most stable person in the entire composition. He is the one in the equilateral triangle. He is the most stable. Everybody else is essentially chaos. Everywhere else in the composition is essentially chaos. Only Christ is the stable one, and that also makes him the stabilizing factor of the painting. Even more than just the fact that he's centered in the painting. That triangle settles the entire thing. It balances the entire painting. Additionally, within that triangle, Christ's head is at the apex. The wine and the bread he's reaching for form the base of that triangle. And as I noted before, the bread and the wine both symbolize Jesus. That is to say, Jesus, the bread, and the wine, these three are one. So with Christ and the two elements of the sacrament of communion, we have a picture of the Trinity within this equilateral triangle. Rather than the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we have the Son, the bread, and the wine. The placement of Christ in the center of the painting is also integral to point out and talk about in more ways than just his placement. In art, especially art where there is some sort of architecture, there are lines that radiate out from a point called the vanishing point. And these lines give a sense of depth to the painting. They make it feel like there are things that are closer and things that are farther away. These are called lines of perspective, or they're called orthogonals. If we highlight those lines, it's interesting to note where that vanishing point is in the painting. So we start with the horizon seen through the openings in the wall behind the characters. Now there are a few different areas through those openings that you can see a horizon. There are mountains, a couple of different rows of mountains, a few rows of hills, and then a plateau right in the foreground within those openings. I have tried to find kind of a central spot between all of those three. And so here is what I have identified as the horizon. Also notice the 4 tapestries on both side walls of this painting. All 4 of them together make another line on each side. After that, we use the line where the walls and the ceiling meet. And after that, we can use the beams in the ceiling, those that are going vertically. And there's even more. If we use the edges of the table, which are mostly obscured in the painting by characters, but approximating them, I've indicated these lines in green. Those lines also meet pretty much in the same place. And what we find when we line up all these orthogonals is that the vanishing point of the painting is directly behind Jesus' head. Or, put another way, the various orthogonals radiate from the head of Christ. Now, on the wall above the opening behind Jesus, there's an architectural feature called a pediment. It's very difficult to see, but it's there if you look carefully. And here, in another image, I'll highlight it for you. And even better still, here's another image where the lighting is a little bit different, a little bit more enhanced for the color and such, and you can see the pediment better. Now, in case you're wondering what a pediment is, it's an architectural feature. On the outside of a building, it usually is along the roof at one side, where you can see the apex of the roof. And that's still a pediment. But there are different kinds of pediments, and some of them are just for decoration, as this one apparently is. It's called a segmental pediment, and it's called that precisely because it is the segment of a complete circle. The one above it, the triangle one right above the segmental pediment, is already a complete triangle, but the one below it, the segmental, is a fragment of a circle. So, when we highlight that where Jesus is and bring out the complete circle, what we see is that that circle radiates directly from the vanishing point of the painting. That is to say that Jesus' head is placed directly in the middle of a circle that is initiated by the pediment above the opening behind him. And what's interesting about that, if we pull back a little bit, look at the whole painting again, is that with the opening behind him and that pediment, we have a halo for Jesus. And quite frankly, he's the only one in the room who really deserves one. But that is, in fact, a very subliminal and symbolic halo. Da Vinci didn't really like halos. He was one of the first artists to try to rid his art of halos altogether. But here, he is giving Jesus a halo because he's recognizing the divinity in this painting. And you also have to keep in mind that if you were to be walking down the streets of Jerusalem and meet Jesus, you would not have seen a halo around that man. The Bible says that we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father. That could refer to a whole bunch of things. I think that that is the inspiration for the halo, but I don't think the halo itself is something that you would be able to see. So Da Vinci makes it something that you don't readily recognize. But once it's pointed out to you, it's one of those things, if you'll pardon the overused expression, it's one of those things you can't unsee. Jesus does in fact have a halo, both symbolically and subliminally. Remarkable composition. Now, if you keep that halo visible and add back in the lines of perspective, those orthogonals, you get another interesting effect. Here it is. It's very interesting. I don't think it works in any other language but English, so I don't think that Da Vinci was aware of it, but he's creating a pun in English. Jesus is the Son, S-O-N. But here, for Da Vinci, he's also the Son, S-U-N. And Jesus even said, I am the light of the world. Imagine if he had said, I am the Son of the world. It would have worked in both ways. I find that a wonderful thing and highly appropriate, given Da Vinci's time, his religion, his faith, and of course the community for which he's painting. So then here's an interesting and important question. Why is there that decorative pediment above that particular opening in the upper room? Is it that that opening is centered? In part, yes. Could it be that that opening is the largest of the three openings? In part, yes. But I think the full reason for the pediment placed above that central opening is to highlight that opening for viewers because it marks the door of the upper room. And that is also significant symbolically. We'll talk about that in a moment, but notice the pediment, the door, the window, these things are all significant and they all highlight Jesus. Jesus said two things that are important about the door being directly behind him in this painting. Of course, it depends on which translation you use, but Jesus said, "I am the door." In other translations, the word gate is used instead of door. That fits the context better. In the scene, he's talking about him being a shepherd and us being sheep, and the thief comes in over the fence. But the good shepherd uses the gate, and he is that gate. The NLT, which is the translation of the Bible that I have been using, says gate. The NASB says door. I am guessing that for the culture and language in which the New Testament is written, door and gate might be the same word. I'm not sure. I'm not a scholar in that area. But also Jesus said elsewhere, "I am the way." And way can be used as another synonym for the word door. So in three different ways, gate, door, and way, the opening behind Jesus as the door is also a symbol for Jesus. I should highlight for you that we know it's a door not only because it's wider and that there's a pediment, but that it also extends further down than the two windows on either side. You can only really tell that with the window directly behind John. You can see where the window ends, and you can't see the one on the other side. But the opening behind Jesus is clearly significantly longer. So there's a bit of an assumption there, but it makes sense that it would be the door. The symbolism, however, with that opening doesn't end with it being a door or being part of the halo for Jesus. This is fascinating. Within the bounds of this painting, the entirety of Christ's incarnate mission is illustrated. As you recall from the scriptures, Matthew 27, it says this, "Two criminals were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left." So he was in the center of three people altogether. And the crucifixion is illustrated here. The two thieves, the two criminals, are illustrated by the two smaller openings, the windows, and then with Jesus himself as the middle opening. He, of course, having the larger opening because he is the door and because he is the greater of all human beings anyway. There is no one greater than he is. Now, if the crucifixion is represented in Da Vinci's The Last Supper, then the resurrection must also be represented. Otherwise, the most integral part of the Christian faith is absent. And I believe that it is represented. Where is it, you ask? Simple. In the very same windows that Da Vinci used to symbolize the crucifixion. We have to remember that Da Vinci's setting for the Last Supper is Italy, not Jerusalem, and that's typical for biblical stories painted in the Renaissance. Place them in the time and culture that your viewers will be able to understand more readily. That's the principle. Even so, had Da Vinci used a setting more reminiscent of the land in which the actual Last Supper occurred, the view through the windows, assuming, of course, that they had windows at all, would have been far more bland and barren. Here, the landscape Da Vinci painted is replaced with a photograph of the Wailing Wall. Now, I don't mean to suggest that the upper room was anywhere near the temple, but it simply is more accurate to what would have been visible for Jesus and his disciples. If there had been no wall, the view would still have been Jerusalem's inner city, with dirt and very little green. Here's a closer view of the same picture so you can see that wall behind the windows. But Da Vinci gave us a fairly lush, typically Italian backdrop with blue skies and lots of green vegetation. Now, green is the symbol for life. As the green is behind Jesus and behind the window, we're looking forward to the return of life, the resurrection. Now, before you accuse me of overanalyzing, let me remind you of Jesus' own words. Jesus told him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me." So, since Jesus is life, it makes sense that the green outside the door should represent him. But also consider this. There is plenty of green on either side of Jesus in the doorway. And behind John, the landscape is nearly completely visible in the window. But on Christ's left side, nearly all the green in the window is obscured by the head of doubting Thomas. Not to suggest anything negative of Thomas himself, but recall the story of the crucifixion. Jesus is crucified between two criminals, and we know that at least one of the two criminals went to heaven. The other, we assume, went to hell, which is known as the second death. Now, let's look at the passage first where the demise of the two thieves is talked about in a little more detail. This comes from Luke chapter 23. One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, "So, you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself, and us too, while you're at it." But the other criminal protested, "Do you not fear God even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." Paradise, which I assume is a portion of heaven or a precursor of heaven or something of that nature, indicates that this particular criminal, the latter of the two, is going to live eternally. The other one, who expressed doubt and scorn, is probably on his way to hell at the point that he says that. We can assume a lot of things, but that's pretty clearly indicated according to Scripture. Who knows? He may have changed his mind after what he hears what Jesus has said, but we don't know that. So let's assume then that he's on his way to hell. Hell is the second death, as recorded in Revelation chapter 21. It says, "But cowards, unbelievers, the corrupt, murderers, the immoral, those who practice witchcraft, idol worshippers, and all liars, their fate is in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death." Now, what I want to emphasize there, I don't want to get into the theology of the previous other lines. The last sentence is what I'm looking at here. This is the second death, which is a reference to hell. Now, your theology aside, some people believe that it's a temporary place where you go there and eventually you are consumed by the fire and are no more in existence at all. Some people believe that it's an eternal burning without being consumed by the fire. It doesn't make any difference. The point is, hell is the second death. Whether or not it's eternal suffering or not, the point is, you are dead. And that's what has been apparently appointed to the second of the two criminals. Now, let's go back a little bit to remembering what I said about left and right in art. Either looking to the left or having something placed on the left of a person in a painting can symbolize evil, depending on the story behind the painting. Now, John, in the Gospels, is known as the beloved disciple, and he is on Christ's right, symbolizing good. And it has all that green life in the window behind him, representing this criminal who was saved. While there is virtually no life to be seen in the window on Christ's left, it is obscured almost entirely by the man who has come to represent doubt in the Gospels, doubting Thomas. He and the lifeless window behind him represent the criminal who was left unsaved because of his own doubt. So it's not just the resurrection of Christ that Da Vinci is referencing here, and he is referencing that, make no mistake. But because he symbolizes so clearly the criminal who was forgiven, it's also a reference to the resurrection of all those who will be raised to be judged by Jesus, the living and the dead. The theme of the painting, then, Da Vinci's statement made to us through his masterpiece, this fresco of magnificent skill and beauty, is that Jesus Christ is the Son of God come in the flesh to die for humanity and to rise again because he is greater than death and the grave. And he did all of this to benefit all people. In short, the theme of the painting is recorded in Hebrews chapter 1. This is verse 3. The sun radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God, and he sustains everything by the mighty power of his command. When he had cleansed us from our sins, he sat down in the place of honor at the right hand of the majestic God in heaven. That is the theme of Da Vinci's painting. In every way possible in two-dimensional art, Da Vinci highlights the divinity of his portrayal of Jesus so that we can understand that, first of all, Da Vinci truly believes that Christ is in fact the Messiah, the Son of God, God himself in essence. But he wants us to understand that the importance of the Last Supper is the glorification of the Son. He is the light of the world. He is the bread. He is the wine. He is the door. He is everything that we need him to be at whatever point in our lives we are. There is a painting called Las Meninas by a Spanish artist named Diego Velázquez, a Baroque artist. He lived from 1599 to 1660. And there is absolutely no denying that he was a magnificently skilled artist. The painting Las Meninas that I'm showing right now is one that he painted fairly late in his career. And very much like Da Vinci's The Last Supper, this painting shows the culmination of all of the techniques and skills that he has learned during his entire career as an artist. And it is a magnificent work of art. There's no denying that. You can study this painting for hours and hours and hours, years and years, and still keep learning things, very much like Da Vinci's The Last Supper, which also is a painting done with the culmination of all the skills that Da Vinci had learned in his career at that point. Now, with Las Meninas, the focus of our eyes goes directly to the little princess there in the center, the low center, who's looking out at us. The other character who's looking out at the audience is the artist himself. It's a self-portrait off there to the left of the canvas. That's Diego Velázquez right there looking out at us. So in a way, he is watching us admire his art. And that's part of the message of this painting. In the description below, I'll leave a link to a video that will give you an analysis of this painting, an excellent analysis of a brilliant painting. And as magnificent as this painting is, I find it lacking. I see the skill, I understand the skill, I understand what's going on, but what detracts from it, for me, is its theme. The theme can be described something as, this is what I've learned. This is my final exam, if you will. This is what I have accomplished in my career as an artist. Look at what I can do. Notice the focus. It is all on Velázquez, even to the point that even though he's not centered in the painting, he's looking out at us, so our attention goes to him. That theme is what takes away from it, though. In contrast to that, I look at Da Vinci's The Last Supper. Heavily damaged painting, about a century older than Las Meninas, and despite the damage to the painting, I find it to be far more glorious than Las Meninas. And I think the reason for that is also the theme. Let me give you a test. How many people do you know who have heard of Diego Velázquez and the painting Las Meninas? Have you heard of it before? I remember studying it in one or two art history courses and one art appreciation course. So, because I have an education in art, I have studied it. I don't have a degree in art, but I do have equivalent credits. So I have studied this painting, and I admire it, Las Meninas. But when I look at Da Vinci's The Last Supper and realize that it's more famous and it has a greater theme, then I have to stand with Da Vinci's painting over Velázquez's painting all the time. When the theme of Las Meninas is, look at me, look at my art, look at what I can do, I'm almost embarrassed for the man. When I look at The Last Supper, I see Da Vinci saying, look at what this man has done. Look at what Jesus has done. Here he is in utter inner turmoil, in a chaotic scene, and yet he is the most stable in the room. He is about to be betrayed and he's about to die. He knows both. And he still remains more stable than everyone else in that room. This man is innocent and he dies for everyone else. And he is raised from the dead. And that is a sign of greatness. Da Vinci does not put himself at all in this painting. And because of the focus on Christ, this painting, The Last Supper by Da Vinci, has much greater potential to live on through eternity because of who it looks at. Whereas Las Meninas is mostly already forgotten by most people anyway. The focus of Christ in Da Vinci's The Last Supper makes it a more powerful painting by far than anything Velázquez could have thought of. And it's all because Da Vinci said, don't look at me. Look at this man. Look at Christ. That is a powerful theme, and one that I admire and respect and hope to imitate in my own art. I'm a writer, not a painter. And my goodness, look at all the things this one man has accomplished. All the things that he did in his life. Every one of them amazing. And I'm talking about Christ, not Da Vinci.